Well, it's great to talk, Malachy, and we have a lot to talk about today, including your career at the New York Times, your recent Pulitzer Prize, your many other accolades, as well as how you actually got to the New York Times. But first, can you just bring us through briefly what you actually do at the New York Times?
Yeah, thanks, Rhona. I work on a team called Visual Investigations, and the idea behind that is that there's lots of visual material out there that will help us investigate, war crimes or chaotic news events, or, a police shooting or something like that. Usually, we do a lot of sort of human rights abuses, or social justice stories tends to be our type of beat, but it could also be news stories as well, like the downing of the Ukrainian passenger plane in Iran and that kind of stuff. I have a few slides that I'll show just in a minute, but the idea is that basically there's cameras everywhere now, be it security camera footage, cell phones, witnesses who are recording their surroundings, satellite imagery, lots of audio material as well that's out there. And then you've got reference material like Google Street View or Google Earth, or different maps. And when you pair it all together and stitch it all together, it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle that comes together and kind of gives you new revealing insights, and can really show you the truth of something that happened. So I might just jump right into a few slides that I have here. Please share my screen. How is this looking here? Can you see that?
That's great.
If I present it, does it present the screen in full or the notes as well? So you just seen the visual investigations up on screen?
Yep. And I'm seeing the slides at the bottom actually, but it's
oh, are you?
I think it's fine.
Is it? Just 1 second. Oh, I can swap displays. There we go. How about that?
Perfect.
Even better. And so just one example of that might be the Las Vegas shooting, and a horrific event in Las Vegas 2 years ago, and 3 years ago actually now, and the Las Vegas gunman killed 58, 59 people. I think somebody else has died recently from their injuries, and shot, if you would believe, close to 500 people in the space of 10 minutes. And the police investigation was kind of mired in suspicion because they changed, details around the timeline and that kind of thing. And then conspiracy theories started to swirl around a cover up and second gunmen and all of that kind of stuff. So we wanted to see if it was possible to create an independent timeline, and from the footage that people filmed that night and other material as well. And so, just like, your team at Storyfil does, our first thing is to collect as much visual material and evidence that's out there as possible. And despite that rampage, lots of people kept their cell phones running and recording the bullets as they came down. And just by organizing those into different areas around the concert venue, and by listening very carefully to each one, I could start to hear patterns in the, see patterns in the videos. So, the duration of one burst of fire and the interval to the next one, the duration of that one and the interval, almost down to the microseconds to between each one of those. And then the sort of rate of gunfire, it transpired that every single burst of fire had its own kind of fingerprint, if you like. And that many of these videos were overlapping each other and capturing the same round of fire from different perspectives. And then by looking at the audio wave, the audio file for each of those videos, you could look more scientifically at that and line up those videos more precisely. And each of these spikes that you're seeing here is sadly the crack of a bullet, or the thud of the rifle in the background. And so it kind of gives you, a very precise accounting of what videos were rolling for what bursts of fire. And then you can stitch the whole thing together. That's what we found, is that, we had multiple different videos that stitched together, recaptured the entire event from lots of different locations over at the hotel where the gunman was and where customers were, in the fairground itself where the victims were as people escaped, and where the police arrived as well. And then by sort of going frame by frame through it, you pick out extra details like the minute or second that certain events are happening. And that's what we were doing then. We're just kind of explain that story and where the police first arrived, when they arrived, and go minute by minute through it. And it was a really horrific story, but, you know, it allowed us to sort of kind of, you know, I think give a deeper understanding of what happened. And by layering the police scanner audio, so the police communications and then the ambulance communications over that as well, you get some insight into how they're responding to it as well. And I remember at one point the ambulances thought that they heard there was a second shooter, which was untrue, and they kind of held back and they were told to stage at a distance from the venue, which was really sad in hindsight because so many people were, you know, on the ground kind of dying in that venue. So anyway, so that's kind of one example of the types of how this collection and analysis of lots of different visual material can kind of give you new insights and reveal something new about a story. And so that's just sort of one example.
That's fascinating. I think the New York or the Las Vegas shooting was a real breakthrough moment for you guys. I remember working on that too in Dublin, and it was kind of, as you said, it was really confusing at the start, and people really didn't understand how events unfolded. And how you guys broke that down was really kind of, it was very new, I remember at the time, and it was kind of really groundbreaking. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, it was kind of our third big piece that we had done. We had kind of seen an opportunity to do this type of work, and we had tried it in a couple of instances, and it worked. You know, one was a chemical attack in Syria, another one was you know, a brawl in Washington D.C. when the Turkish President Erdogan's security detail beat up American protesters who were protesting his presence. And then this was the third one, and I think it was with this one people kind of understood what the genre was and how it could be beneficial journalistically, I think. And in fact, we worked together on some of the reporting for this. One of your team, Dakota, was in with us for a few days, I think, around that time.
I remember that. So I suppose kind of, you know, it's probably good to talk about how you actually got to the New York Times, because what you're doing is kind of very pioneering, it's very new. And this kind of journalism actually really didn't exist even, what, 5 years ago? Well, 10 years ago anyway, certainly.
Definitely not 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you actually get to your job? Like, what was your career path?
I'm not a journalist. Maybe I am now, but
I think you can claim it now after winning the Pulitzer Prize.
Perhaps it doesn't feel like it. It just feels like you're solving problems. But I did engineering in college, you know, and I wasn't much good at it, but I persisted, and I then did computer programming when I left college. It was around the time, you know, that there was lots of jobs in computers, and did that for several years. And an uncle of mine, Vincent Browne, was a journalist in Ireland, and he you know, I lived with him through college and afterwards, and was interested in the work that he was doing and influenced by that, I would say, in some way. And then when he, I knew I wanted to try something else other than computer programming, and I went back into the masters, and around that time, he was starting a magazine in Village magazine, and he was good enough to give me a job in return for building a website for him, and so that was the start of it for me.
Yeah, how long did you work there for?
2 years. I wrote a few articles, and then I kind of joined as staff after about 2 years, and then stayed with them for 2 years until the recession hit in 2008, and the magazine closed at that point. And then tried a few things myself. A website called Politico. There was a few of us involved in that. Joe Galvin, who you know, and Shane Creevy, and a few others. Deirdre Regan, who just recently left the Washington Post, Jack Horgan-Jones was involved in that. He's at the Irish Times now. And then I joined your company, Storyful, in the early days of that. And that was really where like my journalism took a turn, you know, and I really started, you know, learning the ropes of this stuff. And we all did really, because we were kind of, you know, developing verification practices and, you know, sort of how to fact check what was coming out on social media and all of that. And so that was really the start of it for me, of this type of work.
Right, because when I was in college for journalism, like I used to buy a newspaper, which is hilarious now. That was about 2008. And it's probably worth noting that journalism changed dramatically around that time. So newspaper revenue went down, and this thing called Twitter and Facebook and all these things started being widely adapted, and people had smartphones, which sounds like, you know, sounds like the dark ages now, but it really upended things. So how, I suppose, what was like when you were at the early days of Storyful, what was kind of the guiding principle? What problem were you guys hoping to solve?
What we were solving then is, you know, it was an opportunity, I think, that Mark Little, who founded it, saw that, you know, in the traditional sort of news cycle, something might happen in remote Chile, and it would be reported in the local press, or if it was big enough, national press, regional press, and then international press, and that's how the news cycle went. Or the BBC, if they had, you know, or major news organizations had people on the ground, then it would be escalated more quickly. But suddenly, as you say, everybody had the ability to publish. And so Mark saw the opportunity to be able to tap into those conversations as they're happening now in real time and get information, you know, directly from the people who are witnessing something. And I think his sort of light bulb moment was during the Green Revolution in Iran, where Twitter became a major player in organizing and documenting the protests that were happening there. And he was getting more up-to-date information through his Twitter lists and his Twitter hashtags than he was on the nightly news or the broadcast news. And of course, the problem with that is, how do you verify it? And that was really the problem. Like, if we could identify events as they were happening through technology, but then use the same information to cross-corroborate and talk to people who were there and who were witnessing it, and use the techniques that I'm talking about, like, you know, geolocation and comparing a photograph with satellite imagery to make sure it was taken where somebody says it was taken, and basically to establish the basic facts of journalism of when and where something has happened, why it's happened, and how maybe it's happened, and what's happening.
Right. So how do you go then from a small startup in Dublin to working at the New York Times? So you learned all these really valuable skills that not many journalists had in the industry. Like, the industry was quite slow to adapt. So how did you end up then from getting the job at Storyful to your job at the New York Times?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way you said that the industry was so slow to adapt, because, you know, back then I would have loved to have worked and taken, you know, this sort of journalism to the Irish Times or something like that. But, you know, I don't think they were ready or financed well enough to do that sort of stuff. As much as I enjoyed Storyful, you know, I really enjoyed Storyful. It's a great team. So the question was, how did I get to the New York Times? So I think what happened was the New York Times did a study of the media landscape, and they realized that they were far behind their competitors digitally around 2013 to 2014. And I think that, you know, preempted an initiative to try to find people with more digital and visual skills that were perhaps from non-traditional journalism backgrounds to try to bring them from the dark ages into sort of modern, more innovative journalism. And they saw some of my work. I left Storyful and I joined another startup for some reason, for my sins, one startup to another, called Reportedly, and we were very much more in the public public's eye. Storyful was a news agency behind a paywall, and reportedly was very much was all over Twitter and what have you. And so I think that caught the eye of some people inside in the Times, and there wasn't even a job. It was a conversation that led to a round of interviews the next day, which led to what we call an edit test, where you're asked a bunch of questions and how, just to try to get a sense of how you would cover stories, or the ways you might approach them. And that led to me and my family moving over here, within a space of a couple of months.
Yeah. So talk a bit about your fantastic award earlier this year. You won the Pulitzer Prize, which is literally the top award in journalism. What was that like? And can you tell us a bit about the investigation that got you that prize?
The Pulitzer, hearing that, if I think back to the day, it was thrilling, really, to have the work recognized, and the team, especially, I think, because we had been doing good work over the last 3 years and really building and covering what I think are important stories, and doing it in a new way. So it was cool for us to be recognized by a traditional awards body like the Pulitzers. Now our work was combined with some of our colleagues on International, who also covered Russia's malfeasance and its how should I say, its predilections, I think is how they described it, in Europe and Africa and elsewhere. And our work was on what Russia was doing in Syria. And for the first time in the Syrian conflict, they've been operating there for 5 years. And for the first time, we were able to catch them on tape, bombing hospitals and bombing markets and schools and IDP camps and what have you, because we got access to, we had been reporting on bombings of hospitals for quite some time. And in the course of that, we found a source that was recording, just like police scanner audio in the US, they were recording the pilots talking to their ground control and receiving coordinates for their targets. And we decoded all of their language and how they operated, how they went about their business. And we basically caught them bombing 4 hospitals on the first day that we looked at. And then we were doing a bigger story when and in the midst of that story, they came back and bombed one of those hospitals again. And we got them on the day with the audio doing it. And so we published that one very quickly. And then 2 of the worst attacks in Syria last year was on a busy commercial street, a market street, leading up to a market where there were lots of shops and bakeries. And it was 8 o'clock in the morning when people were out and about doing their shopping, that they blasted the place 4 times. They killed dozens of people. And then another one, if you would believe this, was they bombed a camp for displaced people. So people who had been uprooted by the conflict already, brought to this place that they were told would be safe. And it was a remote compound out in the middle of the countryside, nothing else there but refugee families, and they bombed it. And those are some of the worst images that I've seen. But we were able to pin it on specific pilots, and the work was, held up in the United Nations Security Council during meetings in Syria, congressional hearings in the US, and the UN investigative bodies used it to describe for the first time some of these attacks as war crimes, which is a rare step for the UN.
Right. It's really like a testament to the power of journalism. I think we often get a little bit caught up in the noise of the media world, but it really shows sort of journalism at its best, which is holding the powerful to account and actually impacting change.
It does. And also, the stuff that we do, the communities that you and I, through our work, engage with, who are witnesses on the ground, because what we did was the file information. Every time you take a photo or a video, it imprints the time and the date. They sent us those original files of those attacks happening, and that allowed us to match, well, what was happening in minute 3 of 3 minutes past 4 o'clock in the afternoon, here with what was happening in the skies, and we could, as that pilot was coming in and preparing his target, we could retrace their steps right up to launching the bomb at that minute that was captured on video by witnesses. And so it was really it was a collaboration, if you like, between those sorts of documentarians and the skills that we have to bring the truth to light.
Right. We touched a little bit on the journalism industry and how it's kind of changed and things like that. And people often ask me, like, should I do journalism or should I get into journalism or media? And I think over the years, my answer has always been, if you love it, definitely.
Yeah.
Because you have to love it. It's a tough industry at the same time.
It is. Yeah, it is tough. And it's very demanding and grueling and long hours. And like, nobody's afraid of hard work and all the rest of it. But it is that. I remember actually, when I was, deciding to go down this path or to try it out, my dad saying to me, you could do a regular job and sort of do your sort of nine to 6 and have your weekends off and like have a fairly sort of stable lifestyle, or you can, go into journalism, which is really demanding, and you are expected to respond when the news happens, but at the same time, as you say, if you love it, then there's no better thing to do because it's so rewarding. Yeah.
And just kind of one final question. I know there's a lot of pressure on leaving certs as well to pick what they should do next and pick their college course, and a lot of pressure can land on people at a young age when they might not necessarily have an idea of what exactly they want to do. So you went and you did engineering, and then you kind of went from things, and now you've landed where you are. So what would be your advice for people who are kind of picking what they want to do with their lives?
I would say don't sweat that too much. And I mean, obviously pick, something that you feel that you're good at and that you are interested in and that you will enjoy. But I think that's sort of like general life advice anyway. When I was doing this, thinking about changing career, my uncle Vincent said, like, that the trick is to find something that you would do anyway. Do what you would do anyway, and if you can get paid to do that, then you'll be happy and you'll be content. And if it's something that you're going to do anyway, you'll be good at it because you don't mind doing it, and so you'll excel at it. And the salary and the profession and the career will come from that. And I really believe that to be true. And the other thing I would say is to people is to just kind of, understand what you're naturally good at. I remember hearing a story about Johnny Giles, the Irish footballer, that he realized that he was very good at passing the ball, not so good at dribbling the ball. And so he just worked on, what he needed to do to create time and space for him to pass the ball better. And he became one of the best passers of the ball in Premier League football. And I think that's true of any profession. If you can kind of figure out what you're good at and how you can contribute, and then like how you build what you need around you to sort of make the most out of your contribution. And the last thing I would say is like not to be afraid to experiment or change things, in your career, in life, in whatever, to take those risks, calculated risks. That's what I've done a few times, and it hasn't worked out, failed massively on several occasions, but don't be afraid of that either, because you'll learn from that and you kind of carry on.
Right, and it's worked for you as well at the same time. Well, listen, we'll have to leave it there. Malachy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rhona.